Have you ever wondered what could be hidden inside a house, sealed off for nearly a century? On October 15, 1855, the final nail was driven into the attic door of the Grand Grimby estate in coastal Maine. After that day, no one entered. For 78 years, that upstairs space stayed locked, forgotten, or maybe purposely hidden. But in 1933, Miguel and Carmen Rodriguez, an ordinary couple chasing the American dream, broke through that barrier. What they found forced the state of Maine into the largest criminal investigation in its history. It uncovered a religious sect so disturbing that newspapers wouldn't even print the details. And it revealed why an entire town chose silence over justice for almost 8 decades. What was inside didn't just terrify Beacon's Hollow. It rattled the entire nation and forever changed how America thought about religious freedom. Before we go deeper into the secrets of Beacon's Hollow and the house that held horrors in its attic, hit subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, turn on notifications, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our truth seeker community. Miguel Rodriguez wasn't a rich man. For 12 years he worked the docks in Portland, hauling timber bound for Boston and New York. His wife, Carmen, the daughter of Mexican immigrants, was determined to carve out a better life. By the spring of 1933, after years of saving during the Great Depression, they finally bought their first home. That home was the Grimby Mansion. Perched on a windy bluff overlooking Casco Bay, just north of the fishing town of Beacon's Hollow, it was built in 1847 by Jeremiah Grimby, a wealthy lumber baron. 3 stories tall, federal style, with black shutters and weathered clapboard siding, it looked like it had been waiting silently for someone to come back. The local agent, Harold Sinclair, had been a little too eager to sell it. The price was shockingly low for such a large estate. The house has been empty since 1879, Sinclair told them as they walked past dusty rooms covered in sheets. The Grimby family left suddenly, went west, I think, California maybe. His voice had a rehearsed quality, like he was repeating something he didn't quite believe himself. Carmen, though, loved it. The big kitchen, the elegant dining room, the library filled with old leather books. It felt like a home where their family could finally thrive. Miguel was impressed with the sturdy construction, the huge fireplace, even the basement workshop where he could do carpentry. But both of them overlooked the sealed attic door. Rough boards nailed across the opening. Storm damage, Sinclair said quickly when Carmen asked. Roof leaked back in the 70s. They shut it off to prevent rot. Probably nothing up there worth looking at. When the Rodriguezes moved in, the townsfolk weren't exactly welcoming. At the store, conversations stopped when Miguel entered. At church, women smiled politely but never stayed to talk. Even kids avoided the property, daring each other to run past the gate but never lingering. They'll warm up to us, Carmen assured her husband. It's just a small-town thing. But Miguel felt something deeper. The way neighbors glanced at the mansion, almost as if they were afraid of it. Old men crossed themselves when they passed. And more than once Miguel noticed eyes fixed on the attic windows with silent dread. Inside, Carmen tried to warm the place with curtains, polish, and the smell of her cooking. Yet, in certain corners, a chill always lingered. Floorboards creaked when no one was walking. Doors closed or locked on their own. And then came the scratching. It was late November. Rain hammered the windows. Miguel sat in the library with a book while Carmen stitched embroidery by the fire. At 10 o'clock, the grandfather clock chimed. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Both froze. The sound was above them. The attic. Did you hear that? Carmen whispered. Miguel tried to sound casual. Probably mice or squirrels. But the noise was too deliberate, too rhythmic, almost like someone tapping out a code. The sound went on for an hour. Carmen's needle slipped, pricking her finger. Her white cloth stained red. Miguel pretended to keep reading, but his eyes never left the ceiling. Finally, he spoke. Tomorrow I'll get a ladder and check the boards. Maybe some came loose, but both of them knew. It didn't sound like loose wood. And when the scratching suddenly stopped, just like that, it left a worse feeling, as if something up there had stopped to listen to them. The next morning was bitter cold, wind tearing across the bluff. Miguel dragged a ladder to the attic door and inspected it. The boards were solid, old but firm. The square-headed nails hadn't budged. No gaps, no holes, nothing that an animal could have gotten through. Whatever had been making that sound wasn't supposed to be there, and this was only the beginning. When Miguel inspected the boards sealing the attic, he didn't expect to feel his stomach twist. Well, Carmen called from downstairs. "Sealed tight as a coffin," he muttered back, then instantly regretted his choice of words. Something about the way it was done bothered him. The boards weren't cut with any real skill. The wood didn't match the rest of the house. Cheaper, rougher, slapped together in a hurry. Whoever did this wasn't worried about looks, only about speed. And then he noticed it. Along the edge of one plank, faint but undeniable, dark stains. Not rust, not water damage. Stains that looked eerily like dried blood, not smeared from an accident but splattered. Like something had bled against that very board. That night, the noises returned. But this time, it wasn't just scratching. There were voices, muffled, too soft to make out words, but undeniably human. Miguel and Carmen sat frozen in the parlor, staring at the ceiling as if they could see through it. "We should call someone," Carmen whispered. "Who?" "The sheriff," Miguel scoffed, though his voice was tight. "And tell him what?" "That our attic is haunted." But even as he said it, he knew. Tomorrow he'd buy a crowbar. He was going to pry those boards loose and see for himself. He had no idea that choice would open the door to secrets buried for almost 80 years. Secrets that would turn their dream home into a waking nightmare. By Monday, Miguel decided to dig deeper. At the Beacons Hollow municipal office, he asked about the Grimby family. The town clerk, Tobias Fletcher, seemed nervous. "Too nervous. Those records are old," Fletcher stammered, fiddling with his glasses. "Water damage, mice, not really suitable for the public." But Miguel knew how to deal with reluctant officials. A mix of persistence and a crisp $5 bill finally got him access to the basement archives. What he found was disturbing. Jeremiah Grimby had moved to Beacons Hollow in 1845 with his wife, Rebecca, and their 7 children, Ezekiel, Patience, Charity, Hope, Faith, Temperance, and little Josiah. Wealthy, respected, admired, he was a lumber baron who quickly rose to prominence in town. But between 1852 and 1855, something horrifying appeared in the records. 3 children, Charity, Hope, and Temperance, simply vanished. No death certificates, no burials, no marriages. It was as if they had never existed after that date. Fletcher tried to explain. Families moved a lot. Or maybe sickness? His hands shook as he said it. Miguel could see it in his eyes. The man was terrified of even speaking about the Grimby family. Deeper research uncovered the connection. Jeremiah Grimby was involved with a group called the Purification Brotherhood, a fringe sect that had splintered from the revivalist movements of the time. Their belief? That children were born sinful, and that through suffering, fasting, pain, discipline, their souls could be cleansed. In Beacons Hollow, Jeremiah was their biggest supporter. He hosted gatherings in his mansion. He gave them money. And he made his children endure rituals that he called purification. When Miguel shared this with Carmen over dinner, her face paled. 3 children don't just disappear, she snapped. If they died of illness, there'd be records, graves, something. Miguel nodded grimly. I checked. There aren't any Grimby children buried here after 1851. Carmen's eyes flicked upward. The scratching had begun again. And suddenly her question broke the silence. What if they never left the house? The next morning, there was a knock at the door. It was Dr. Edmund Hartwell, the town's elderly physician. Tall, gaunt white hair, pale eyes that looked burdened by 70 years of secrets. "Mr. and Mrs. Rodriguez," he said, hat in hand. "I need to speak with you." About this house. About the Grimby family. He sat in their parlor, coffee untouched in his hands. And then he began. "I was a young doctor when the Grimbys lived here. I was called to this house many times. And what I witnessed," his voice cracked. He paused, fighting his own memories. "Some things stay with you forever. Things you wish you could forget." He described the children, starved, covered in burns and welts. Their mother claimed it was accidents. Their father insisted it was discipline. But Hartwell knew better. These were ritual wounds, justified with scripture, defended as holy purification. Carmen whispered the question they both dreaded. "What happened to the missing children, doctor?" The old man closed his eyes. His voice was barely audible. In October of 1855, Rebecca called me here one last time. She said Jeremiah had finally received his divine revelation. She led me to the attic. He stopped, shaking his head as if refusing to relive the memory. There are sins so monstrous that even God turns his face away. What Jeremiah Grimby did to his children, no human being should be capable of such cruelty. Hartwell stood suddenly, his frail frame trembling. The town sealed it up. Leaders said it was better to bury the past, to let the dead rest and the living forget. He turned to the Rodriguezes at the door. But you deserve to know. Just be careful. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The doctor's words changed everything. Miguel and Carmen could no longer dismiss the attic as creaks and rodents. They knew they were living inside a tomb of secrets. In the days that followed, they searched for everything they could find about the Purification Brotherhood. What they discovered was even darker than they imagined. The sect believed children must endure trials to burn away sin. At first it was fasting, kneeling on corn kernels, endless prayers. But then it escalated. Forced ice baths, ritual beatings, deliberate starvation. Some children didn't survive, and when they died, the sect celebrated them, declared them pure, and claimed God had taken them home. Carmen shook her head as she read those accounts by lamplight. No parent could do this to their own children. Not in the name of God. Miguel said nothing for a long time. Finally, he whispered, "Faith can twist into anything when people are desperate enough. If they believe their children's eternity depends on it, they'll justify anything." That night, the sounds from the attic changed again. Not scratching, not tapping, but soft, pitiful crying. Children's voices. Weak, hopeless. Carmen broke down in tears, clutching Miguel's arm. "We have to open that attic," she sobbed. "Those children don't deserve to be forgotten. Not like this." What if the home you dreamed of owning was hiding something unspeakable? What if, behind the walls and sealed doors, the voices of murdered children were still waiting to be heard? That's exactly what Miguel and Carmen discovered in their old house in Beacon's Hollow. And what they uncovered would drag a century-old nightmare back into the light. Miguel couldn't shake Dr. Hartwell's warning. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. But how could they ignore the cries in the night? Pretending nothing happened, while living above the forgotten dead, wasn't an option. So they made a decision. Saturday. That would be the day they'd face the truth. Carmen spent the days leading up to it preparing candles, cleaning supplies, everything she could think of. Still, she knew no amount of scrubbing could erase what they might find. But on Friday night, someone knocked at their door. It was Sarah Peaton, the oldest resident in town, well into her 90s. She had lived through the tragedy no one else dared to speak of. And now she was ready to tell the story in full. Back in 1855, she explained, Rebecca Grimby wasn't always insane. She was a loving mother. But her husband Jeremiah twisted religion until cruelty sounded holy. He claimed their children were chosen, and that suffering was the path to salvation. At first it was endless scripture recitations, then fasting, then punishments disguised as spiritual trials. By 1854, the Grimby children looked like shadows. Thin, pale, hollow-eyed. Sarah remembered seeing little Temperance, just 12 years old and barely 40 pounds. The child mouthed one word at her, help. But Sarah was only 16. What could she do against a man like Jeremiah Grimby? The horror reached its peak in October of 1855. Jeremiah declared a final purification, a ritual that would supposedly send his children straight to heaven. 3 children went into that attic. None came back alive. Jeremiah told the town it was a miracle. Rebecca broke down completely. And the townspeople? They looked the other way. Back then, child abuse wasn't even a crime. And no one wanted to admit they'd allowed it to happen. So they made a deal. The Grimbys left town, the attic was sealed, and everyone pretended nothing happened. For 78 years, the truth stayed buried, but Sarah gave Miguel and Carmen one last warning. Whatever you find up there, don't turn it into a spectacle. Those children suffered enough. That night, the sounds from the attic changed. No longer scratching, not crying, but singing. Thin, ghostly voices whispering hymns from another world. Miguel and Carmen wept, knowing they couldn't turn back. Saturday morning arrived with storm clouds rolling over Casco Bay. At 9 o'clock sharp, Miguel placed the ladder under the sealed attic door. His crowbar felt like a weapon or maybe a key. Are you sure you want to do this? he asked. Carmen's reply was steady, though her eyes brimmed with tears. They've been alone in the dark for 78 years. It's time. The boards gave way too easily, as if the attic itself wanted to be opened. A rush of cold air poured out, not musty but sharp, carrying the stench of fear. Inside, lantern light revealed the attic wasn't storage anymore. It was a chapel of suffering, Bible verses painted across the walls, horrific drawings of torment, an altar stained dark, and beside it, 3 smaller platforms, each one built for a child, each fitted with restraints, worn from struggling. Scattered across the floor were children's belongings, a cracked doll, a tiny shoe, a tattered nursery book, and in the corner, 3 small forms under rotting blankets, surrounded by dried flowers long turned to dust. Miguel whispered, horrified, "Carmen, call the sheriff, call Hartwell, maybe even the state police. This is too big for us alone." But even as he said it, he knew the truth. Once the world saw this attic, nothing about their lives, or Beacon's Hollow, would ever be the same. When the sheriff arrived, he was shaken. Dr. Hartwell grimly reminded them. The whole town didn't just forget. They chose not to know. Investigators cataloged evidence. The coroner confirmed what was already obvious. Reporters gathered outside, drawn to whispers of a crime scene like no other. But it was the carvings on the attic walls that broke everyone's hearts. Words scratched by little hands. "Please help us. Papa hurts us. God doesn't answer. We want to go home." And the final plea, carved deeper than the rest. "Forgive us, Papa. We tried to be good." By evening, the mansion wasn't just Miguel and Carmen's home anymore. It had become the center of a storm, the past colliding with the present. A forgotten crime, finally exposed. And yet, for Miguel and Carmen, it wasn't about headlines. It was about giving peace to children who had been abandoned for nearly a century. Imagine finding out the house you live in wasn't just old. It was the scene of a ritualistic murder. 3 children. Gone. Their story hidden for nearly 8 decades. That's the nightmare Miguel and Carmen faced. And the discovery that came next would shake everyone to their core. On the 3rd day of the investigation, state archaeologist Dr. Patricia Henley uncovered something no one expected. A small metal box buried under the attic floorboards. Inside was a diary, Rebecca Grimby's diary. At first, it read like the journal of a mother desperate to protect her children. But as the pages went on, her neat handwriting became shaky, almost unrecognizable, just like her mind. March 1853. Jeremiah says the children must fast. Little Temperance cries, but I give her bread in secret. I fear God will punish me for interfering. April 1853. Charity fainted. Jeremiah says her spirit is weak. He's built something in the attic. An altar. Entry by entry, Rebecca changed. From mother to accomplice. By 1854, she was praising her children's purification marks. When Hope asked why God wanted her to hurt, Rebecca told her it was necessary, just like Jesus' suffering. And in October 1855, the entries turned chilling. Rebecca wrote about Jeremiah's ultimate revelation, a ritual that would send their children straight to heaven without the corruption of death. Her final entry was the breaking point. October 15th. They are gone. Jeremiah says they're angels now, but I can hear them crying in the dark. We have become monsters in the name of God. But the horror didn't end there. Dr. Henley also found a second document, a letter Jeremiah had written to his brother. It was never sent, and what it contained was, beyond disturbing. Jeremiah compared himself to Abraham, called his children sacrifices, and claimed God had chosen them to prove the strength of faith through suffering. He described torture as if it were holy, beds of thorns, branding, near drownings, and he wrote about his children's final moments like it was a business deal. Cold, detached, proud, no guilt, no remorse, only gratitude to God for making him the instrument of their deaths. When the investigators read the diary and the letter aloud, the room went silent. Even the most hardened officers struggled to process what they were hearing. Sheriff Brennan finally said what everyone was thinking. In 30 years, I've never seen anything like this. Those children were tortured to death by their own parents, and the parents convinced themselves it was God's work. The truth spread through Beacon's Hollow like wildfire. Elderly residents finally admitted they'd known something. Margaret Sinclair revealed her own grandfather had been one of the town leaders who struck the deal to cover it all up. For generations, families in Beacons Hollow had lived with that silence, out of shame, fear, and self-preservation. But now the truth was out. And what about Jeremiah Grimby? He never made it to California. Records showed he bought train tickets to Chicago, but he and his family never arrived. Instead, he abandoned Rebecca and their surviving children somewhere out west. Rebecca was later found dead near a Nebraska railway station, frozen and alone. The surviving children were sent to orphanages under false names, scattering into history with their trauma unspoken. For Miguel and Carmen, the case didn't just bring headlines. It brought a terrible question. Could they keep living in a home where children had been starved, beaten, and killed? Or would leaving mean abandoning the memory of those children all over again? The answer came one snowy December night. The strange sounds from the attic, scratching, crying, even singing, suddenly stopped. For the first time since they'd moved in. Silence, Carmen whispered. They're at peace now. On the table sat a photo album they'd made to honor the Grimby children, charity, hope, and temperance. Their story was finally told, their suffering acknowledged. The investigation officially closed as a historical homicide. Too old to prosecute, too important to forget. And while Beacons Hollow will always carry the weight of its dark past, Miguel and Carmen had given the children something no one else ever had. A voice. What if the walls of an old house could tell their stories? What if behind polished wood and painted plaster lay the bones of children who were never meant to be forgotten? That's exactly what Miguel and Carmen Rodriguez discovered when they bought the Grimby Mansion in Beacons Hollow. At first it was just supposed to be their family home, but soon it became the center of one of the most disturbing revelations in American history. The remains of 3 children were found in the attic, Charity, Hope, and Temperance Grimby. Their deaths had been hidden for decades. News of the discovery spread across the country, and donations poured in to give those children the burials they deserved. In the town's cemetery, 3 simple headstones were placed. Each inscription read like a quiet prayer. Beloved child of God, but the graves weren't the only reminder. The people of Beacons Hollow had to face an uncomfortable truth. This wasn't just one man's crime. It was a crime covered by silence. A memorial was raised in the town square, not only for the Grimby children, but also to acknowledge the town's own failure to protect them. The words carved into stone still echo today. In memory of Charity, Hope, and Temperance Grimby, and in acknowledgement of our obligation to protect the innocent and to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. For Miguel and Carmen, deciding whether to stay in that house wasn't easy. But in the weeks after the discovery, something strange happened. The cold that clung to certain rooms lifted. The doors stopped slamming shut on their own. That heavy, watchful presence that once haunted them vanished. It felt as if the house itself had made the choice for them. Instead of running, they stayed. Not as homeowners, but as guardians of memory. The mansion was no longer just a house. It had become a monument. Miguel transformed the basement into a workshop where he built wooden toys, all donated to local orphanages, his way of honoring children who never had the chance to play. Carmen turned Jeremiah Grimby's old study into a small library filled with books on child welfare, religious extremism, and community responsibility. Anyone could visit, students, researchers, social workers, because to them, education was part of keeping the children's voices alive. And people came. School groups, college classes, journalists, curious neighbors. Miguel and Carmen never charged a dime. They believed it was their duty to share the story, even when the media stopped caring. But the impact of the Grimby case didn't fade. It shaped new child protection laws. It became a case study in universities. And it forced America to reckon with how easily silence can hide abuse. On the first anniversary of the discovery, Miguel and Carmen held a memorial service right in their home. Dr. Hartwell, Sarah Peaton, and dozens of townspeople came. In the room beneath the attic where the children had died, Carmen spoke their names, Charity, Hope, and Temperance. They weren't headlines. They weren't just victims. They were children. After the service, 3 oak trees were planted in the front yard. Oak, chosen for its strength and longevity, a living symbol of resilience and of a vow that such silence must never happen again. Years passed. Miguel and Carmen grew older. Their own children moved away, but letters kept arriving. Parents wrote, saying the case helped them see the warning signs of abuse. Survivors of childhood trauma shared that the Grimby story gave them comfort, proof that their suffering mattered too. One letter stood out above the rest. A genealogist had traced the bloodline of Ezekiel Grimby, one of the children who survived and was placed in an orphanage. His great-granddaughter, Mary Thompson from Oregon, had grown up knowing almost nothing of her family's past. When she finally learned the truth, she traveled across the country to see the memorial and visit Miguel and Carmen. Sitting beneath the now-tall oak trees, she shared what she knew. Ezekiel never spoke of his childhood, but he lived with nightmares his entire life. He couldn't stand to hear a child cry. Now she understood why. He had carried the weight of survival for 80 years. Silent, haunted, alone. As the sun set over Casco Bay that evening, Miguel and Carmen reflected on their journey. They hadn't set out to be activists. They'd only wanted a home. But history doesn't always choose politely. It sometimes forces ordinary people to carry extraordinary truths. Today, the Grimby Mansion still stands. Miguel and Carmen have since passed, but their children donated the house to the state. It's now a historical site and educational center dedicated to child welfare. Visitors can walk its halls, see the attic where 3 young lives ended, and learn why silence can be as dangerous as cruelty itself. The memorial in the town square has grown too. It now bears the names of other children lost to abuse and neglect. And etched alongside them, a quote from Miguel Rodriguez. "The dead cannot speak for themselves, so we must speak for them. And we must listen when the living cry out for help, so future generations won't have to uncover attics filled with bones." The Grimby case reminds us that evil often hides behind the mask of righteousness, and that communities have a moral duty to protect their most vulnerable, even when it's hard. Think about it. Do you believe every secret of Beacon's Hollow was truly uncovered? Or are there still shadows hiding stories too dark to tell? Leave your thoughts below, and more importantly, let's talk about how we can protect children today. If this story gripped you, hit like, share it with someone who loves dark history, and subscribe for more tales from America's hidden past. Because sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that really happened.